Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Grand Slam Journey podcast, where I, together with my guests, discuss various topics related to finding our passion, maximizing our potential, sports, life after sports, and taking lessons from our athletic journey to our next careers, growing our leadership and business. If you enjoyed this conversation, I want to ask you to please do two things. One, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform you use to listen to the episode. Two, please share this episode with someone you believe will enjoy it as well. My today's conversation is with Natalie Novosel. Natalie is a former college and professional basketball player. She was born in Lexington, Kentucky, and played for the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, where she and her team helped elevate the program to an elite level, achieving 2 national championship games. After her college career, Natalie was selected by Washington Mystics in the first round of the 2012 WNBA draft. We talk about her WNBA experience and then also playing overseas for 5 seasons. Natalie currently works at Transamerica World Financial Group, revolutionizing the financial industry and applying her basketball lessons to her entrepreneurship journey. Besides the general things that my guests and I typically discuss, such as how Natalie found her passion, basketball, what brought her to the sport, her college selection, as well as her college and professional basketball challenges and wins, there's so much more in this episode. Natalie is one of the most energetic, passionate, and authentic people I have met. I love how openly and vulnerably she shares all of her struggles of finding her voice, confidence, and stepping into her own power. We talk a lot about what it takes to create teamwork, believing in self, and the daily practice of creating confidence and authority. We discuss what it means to lead by example versus leading by example and being able to communicate clearly at the same time. We talk about the costs when you're not believing in yourself and you're in an environment where you feel like you don't belong. Natalie shares some of her lessons from playing professionally overseas and finding the right country and culture fit for her, and then transitioning from basketball to entrepreneurship, recovering from injuries, creating daily program and routine that would help her transition to her new goals, and updating our belief system. Natalie shares how she found a way to create and support a thriving team, importance of inspiring, leading self and leading others, and earning respect. Lastly, Natalie shares some great tips about personal finance, as that's her expertise. And so if you want to reach out to her, you can find all of Natalie's contact information in the episode notes. My favorite quote from this episode:
when we came together, it was just so beautiful. And we had the ability to call each other out on the court because we had the authority to do so, because we backed it up with our own work, right? We held a high standard for ourselves, which then gave us the authority to call out another teammate who was sandbagging or not doing as well as they could be.
And now I bring you Natalie Novosel. Enjoy the listen. Hi, Nat. How are you?
Hey, Miss Clara. Good. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. Thank you for accepting my invitation and welcome to the Grand Slam Journey podcast. I look forward to diving into basketball and finance and your journey from basketball to finance. But before we do all that, please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So everybody, hello. My name is Natalie Novosel, and I'm actually from Lexington, Kentucky, but coming from you today from Austin, Texas. But, I grew up middle class, My dad worked. My mom was kind of a stay-at-home mom after kind of an architecture career. I have an older sister who's 35. My twin brother, obviously same age as me, is 33. And I grew up kind of the pretty angry kid, mostly because I was kind of the runt of the family. Honestly, my brother is like 6'5", my sister's 6'1". I'm, 5'11", which isn't small, but in my family I really was. And they just had these big physical bodies, but then these big personalities as well. And I just wasn't. I was a shy kind of introvert. So I really struggled to find my way and my place sort of role in the family. And I spent the majority of my time, probably my childhood, kind of obsessed with basketball and winning. And that was kind of what I channeled all that anger into basketball. And it took me a really, really far place. I was able to go play basketball at Notre Dame, got a full scholarship there, and past that, fortunate enough to go play overseas for about 6 years and play in the WNBA as well. And I loved it. I would say my basketball professional career ended before I wanted it to, mostly due to injury. And so after that, I kind of converted from like athlete to business athlete, I always like to say, and utilizing all those tools that I used in the athletic realm and have converted to the business world. And it's been a challenge up and down, leading myself, not having a coach telling me what to do, when to get up, what time to be there, self-governing myself. So it's just been an incredible journey and almost very fulfilling journey of self-discovery and teamwork and everything that I used from basketball, but also a lot more because a lot of it didn't come naturally to me. Like I said, I kind of was that introverted kid and really resisted business and talking to people and getting outside of my comfort zone. And once I stopped resisting is really when my career has taken off. And so moved to Texas. I wanted a change of pace. I'd been in the pandemic for a couple of years in Kentucky and been used to living in big cities overseas, and I wanted to change. And so I decided on Austin, Texas. And so really enjoying it here and came here really to ultimately open up my own brokerage and kind of just start again. My first time I ever really got to choose where I wanted to live. So obviously the teams chose that for us. So it was a fun place, and I'm glad to be here talking to you today, Clara.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I resonate with so many things you have said. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why I interview athletes, because it seems no matter what sport we choose, there are so many commonalities. Even that decision to change the career that is sometimes or often forced on us, and that transition to finding your new identity. So thank you for that intro. And it was actually interesting. Your upbringing did make me compare a little bit of my own in a way. It seems like you are from a loud family, which is my family the same. The loudest wins the argument.
There you go. That's right.
How did you find basketball? Did your brother and your sister play it as well? Or how did you get into the sport?
Kind of at a young age, maybe like 6, 7, are my youngest memories of basketball or playing actually outside the backyard with my family. So my dad was a 4-sport athlete, actually. Wow. I think that was in high school, and then ended up going to college for basketball. I remember him working with us at a young age of eye coordination. I'm so grateful for us, and just always held us up as champions, like y'all are going to be champions, and everything that we did, and just worked with us on that. So my brother and my sister all went to college for basketball. And so I just remember the backyard. We had this, 20 by 20 feet cement lot out there, old basketball court, no glass or anything, the ones you could like throw it as hard as you could against the backboard and just like drops in, something my sister took advantage of a lot. I remember really enjoying it, but the problem was I wasn't good enough yet to beat them without the skill, because I physically just was so much smaller. And so I would lose just like game after game after game. And it was just so demoralizing because it was like the first thing that I actually liked. And so, how did I handle that? Not very well. And I would just rage and throw the ball and curse and, absolute tantrum, sore loser, all of it. And then no wonder nobody wanted to play with me anymore. So there I just was, always the last one on the court. But it was my incontrollable emotions that I had nobody to play with. And so what did I end up doing? I just started practicing. And I just ended up getting better. I only had myself. And so I just started getting better, practicing, and I'd go out every single day for hours and would get better. And my charm, I guess, or something, got it, coerced them back, bribery, maybe back on the court. And I maybe would win like 1 game out of 10 that day. But I held on to that one win like it was the best feeling in the world. And so I was like, wow, if I practiced this much and like got that win, imagine if I practiced like this much, how many wins could I get? And that was kind of like that cycle. And then slowly but surely, them kind of relying on their height and just already natural sort of talent that way, I was able to make huge strides because my talent and skill got a lot better. And I just had to figure out how to win. And I always attribute that to early years predominantly of getting a lot better was because they were so big and gargantuan that I like had to figure it out. And that just helped me continued on through pro. It's really where the passion kind of took off. And then it was kind of like an addiction. Like you win one game, you like need that feeling again. And that's maybe the positive obsessions in that regard, addictions and in that. So that's kind of how really where it took off.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it is interesting because I think what you mentioned, it really speaks about drive, the grit and creativity you had to find about playing against somebody larger and stronger. Obviously, there's the dynamic of the size, which makes a huge difference, especially when you're a kid, right? Everybody who's played any sport know 1 or 2 years difference is huge at that age, whether you're 8 or 10 or 10 to 12 or 13. And then obviously playing with your brother, whether we want to admit it or not, this is a sensitive topic nowadays. But there is certain strength that is born in the male body and the female body.
That's right.
So
Absolutely.
Just that speed and power. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, you're exactly right. I was watching a documentary once and it was talking about how just playing pickup games, but like it was in a culture of football, like soccer. And they tracked these kids who would just pick up a ball and could play in the streets in the middle of an alley, like anywhere, versus like these kids who had grown up in a structured environment and how many of them, like the differences, went pro. And it was the people, the athletes that had grown up and just played in these small places wherever they could play instead of the ones that had the drills every day and they weren't playing. They were just drills, and it's just, that's really where you learned how to be really good at basketball wise back now, like one-on-one or fitting in the tight spaces or getting around the angles and like trying to figure it out. And that was really, I think, the blessing that my family gave me and in all of the losses and L's that I took initially, to stay with it and figure it out. And that was really the difference.
Yeah, it seems like it really teaches you to improvise and be creative with navigating that larger and more powerful players around you. And I also want to touch base on the hating to lose. This is something I have been observing and relate. I have been awful loser. I actually often say, if I knew how to lose better, I could have been better tennis players because it could have allowed me to potentially move on after my losses better.
Sure.
There's, some losses that I pity the coaches needing to deal with me for even like a week or 2 weeks later. But on the other side, there's the opposite thing. Personally, I actually hated to lose more than I enjoyed the win. And so the feeling of winning, it's great, but it typically doesn't last as long as the feeling you get when you lose. I feel that really sticks with you and drills in. And even when I'm watching other athletes or hearing other athletes, comes to my CrossFitter, Rich Froning, he'd always say, I just hated losing more than winning. So I wonder if actually that mentality is almost more important for being great than the joy of win. Do you feel like it actually helped you? Because it seemed like you really buckled down because of that feeling and were able to put in the effort and wanting to be great so you don't have that awful feeling again.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think it's easy when you're on the top or once you are winning, it's harder to stay on top of the mountain. They always say the wolf climbing the mountain's a lot, hungrier than the wolf on top of the mountain. Yes. But Jill Ellis was the U.S. women's national team coach for the women's soccer for a while. And she said the air at the top of a mountain is thin for a reason because you're not meant to dwell up there. And it's so true. But that's where a lot of people end up getting complacent in that regard. And I think later on in my career, I think that's where I kind of got to. And we can talk about that later too. But I do definitely believe that once you kind of get those wins, it's just so much more powerful and all those losses don't matter as much anymore. But once I developed that culture and habit of winning, it transitioned to like hatred of losing. Yes. Because once I had the confidence and really believed in myself, it was like, I'm not happy with it. And I remember you talking about it a little bit earlier about how like after a loss, you like couldn't talk to anyone for a while. And I just remember even my high school loss to not go to the state championship tournament that year. And it was my senior year. Like, I had all these dreams of going out on top, winning Miss Basketball. And then it didn't happen. And I remember being literally depressed for 2 months and just could not snap out of it because it's like you hold on to these dreams. And I do remember, and obviously I had my fair share of losing as well. And those always seem to stand out a lot more with it. I don't know why.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say, like one of my business mentors, he's always like, I hated the fear or like the fear of failing and being broke more than I liked the winning, you know? So it definitely carries over into all the aspects of your life as well later on.
Yeah, I agree. One additional thing I want to touch base on is your twin brother, because I always wondered how it is to grow up with a twin. I actually coached couple girls that were young at the time when I coached them through like 11 to 13 years old, and they were identical twins, which was really hard. I had to learn for a while, you know, which one is which, but their game was very different. So it's almost like the one had a forehand strength, the other one had a backhand strength. I wonder, were there commonalities between you and your brother in regards to basketball game, or how did you navigate the childhood together?
Yeah. And I love talking about my twin because it's like my best friend in the world. And I'm just so grateful that God gave me a boy twin. That I will be the first to admit. We competed, obviously, but it was never combative where I genuinely wanted him to lose and I wanted to beat the crap out of him. Whereas what I did with my sister, like my sister was 3 years older, played on a lot of the same teams growing up. I was the I'll admit, little shit. And she was a junior and senior in high school. I was like that 8th grader freshman coming in and playing. And we were in switch positions. Like now looking back, it's like, gosh, I would have hated that if I were her. But I was just so set on proving myself. And so that dynamic, that's why I'm so grateful I had a twin brother, is because Nathan and I, we just were always supportive of each other and pushed each other more so. It was easy for us to just like go in the same direction, supporting each other rather than like fight it out, which is kind of what I imagine can happen. But yeah, we had a whole friend group with his people and a whole friend group with my people. And we just kind of all hung out. And I think that was just really special, kind of cementing that. And I just remember going to the gym with him late at night, Friday, Saturday, you know, everybody else was at parties or something. And we would just be in the gym. Loved it. Like had no ambition to go anywhere else except for in the gym. And so we would just dream in the middle of an afternoon and just laugh. Those are like the fun memories I remember with my brother. And now I'm grateful to still be in business with my family as well, working with him. And some of that still happens. But I think really those younger years cemented us in that bond is just like unparalleled. And, you know, we've been with each other for our whole lives. And it's just a built-in connection. I'm so grateful for that.
One additional thing I want to touch base about basketball, coming from the tennis, that's more individual sports. And a lot of the connections that I have are in the individual sport arena. How is it to learn how to navigate the team dynamics? And that's also something that I wonder if in tennis we sort of miss. So when we transfer to the work environment, because we're so used to just depending more on ourselves, maybe you have doubles, so there's like 2 people instead of 1. I wonder if basketball is actually better sport for that, because you have more people you need to learn to depend on. And maybe even how is the dynamic learning about that teamwork early on? I wonder, how do you transition to that true team spirit?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. The thing what I love about basketball, the universality of it, we'll just say that's a word, is that anyone can come anywhere with a basketball, maybe their shoes, and just play together. And I love that about sport, how united it can be. Even you see this with the world with the Olympics. Usain Bolt, for example, Serena Williams, everyone just loves them. And because they've achieved something. And that's what I love about sport. And so I think with basketball, with all of those pickup games that you play, you have to sometimes stand out or lead the team, or other times you actually are surrounded by good players and have to learn to play within that system. And I think that really does help develop, especially after playing. But also I've been on really good teams and I've been on really bad teams. Like at Notre Dame, we were able to go from a just a mediocre culture. We weren't a losing culture by any means, but it was just a mediocre program that was kind of on the verge of elite. And so what really helped us become and change that culture is the personal accountability of a lot of the different key players. We had 5 seniors graduate my sophomore year. And those first 2 years, there was like 5 or 6 different players that really hadn't gotten their chance yet because of all those senior talent. And it was just like a perfect storm. Everybody worked as hard as they could. And then we came together and then everyone played their roles. And that is really what took us off into back-to-back national championship games and really changed the culture into what Notre Dame, the program, is today. So I think how it can pertain to business and teamwork in general is, a lot of people, they say like, oh, we love athletes because they're teamwork and discipline and stuff like that. But I think it goes a lot more beyond that. For example, myself, I really was just a leader by example. I worked super hard. I could always count on me. And that's kind of how I grew up. Really didn't use my voice a lot. And I remember getting to college, my head coach, Hall of Fame, Muppet McGraw, Natalie, you're selfish. Like it resounding in the rafters, like, what? Like me, priding myself, not a selfish player, always passing the ball. And it was because she was like, you leave teammates out to dry every single time you don't use your voice. And so it was kind of a big wake up call. I had to really develop that voice and find it. And I'm so grateful that I did because it carried over into obviously business and things like that. In business, you have to be a lot more than just a leader by example, obviously very important, but it was really one step past that. It's constant communication. And me, introvert that does need the time to recharge, it's like having to sometimes like get out of that mode and call everyone and keep the team together. And it's a lot of it on me when really I was just kind of that leader by example. And so all of that what kind of has been really growth step points on leadership and in development. It's been a whole masterclass and I'm still learning for sure.
Oh, that's fantastic. And there's so much to dive into, even on the communications. And I resonate a lot because one thing that really stuck with me through tennis, and I think it was ideal when I was a kid, believe it or not, people think I'm extrovert. I think I'm more introverted. I'm totally fine being alone. I'm not bugging anyone. I still remember when I was 15, 16, getting my first cell phone. And then you had to figure out how to send a text message to someone. And I remember being on a call with my mom. I was like, why do I even need to talk to anybody? I was very focused on the sport and I had my own apartment already back then. And so lived by myself and just went between the courts and the house. So that introversion to extroversion is definitely hard. It seems like in your example, when the team came together, what would you attribute it to the most? Was it the coaching dynamic or were there a few key players that enable it or perhaps combination of the two?
My coach, and I'm very grateful to have such a high level coach at that point of my life and in that position, she always held high standards. And so what it was for us was the players, the individual players. We were talented and we came together, but it was the accountability that I'm going to work hard and I have my own goals and I am not going to be denied. And I think that's really what did it because I had a really hard sophomore year. I lost my starting position my 3rd game in and struggled with confidence because every single year before that, my whole mantra, my whole life paradigm, it was like, if I work hard, I get what I want. And I worked really hard and then I didn't get what I want. And it literally crashed my whole belief system and I couldn't get it together that year. And I remember being so grateful when that year was over, when obviously we lost in the Sweet 16 and no player in their right mind wants to go home, but I was just so done. And I just wouldn't be denied that year going into it. And that's what maybe 2 or 3 or 4 other players did as well. And so when we came together, it was just so beautiful. And we had the ability to call each other out on the court because we had the authority to do so because we backed it up with our own work, right? We held a high standard for ourselves, which then gave us the authority to call out another teammate who was sandbagging or not doing as well as they could be. And so if we're over here working as really hard as we can, then we're allowed to have that back and forth a little bit. And then we would leave it on the court and go off the court, and I think that's what was so amazing. I can call any one of those teammates now, and we may not be best friends, even maybe weren't then, but we had that connection and trust on court that they would still do anything for me today. I can guarantee that. And that was why the leader by example in me really shined. And growth modes was for me to start being more present as a leader vocally.
From the communication, what would you say were your biggest learnings you had to do to overcome? How do you communicate even in the business world? I think I've been very much naive. Oh, if I just lead by example, people will notice. But voicing it out, it's so much more powerful. And also explaining even where you come from or the reasoning and being sometimes vulnerable about how you feel and how you say it in a way that is motivating to others instead of pushing them down in some ways. Were there some things that were the key learnings that you maybe even use now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's still an evolving process. I'm the first to admit that. I think because I never spoke growing up, I just struggled with hearing my voice and hearing gravity to my voice and having power in it. It just wasn't there. And so I never naturally had confidence in it. So when I would say things, it would be that awful that sometimes us women do. It's like the timid, oh, I don't know, or like, trail off, or someone interrupts or talk over you, and it was just kind of what I had grown up dealing with. I remember the biggest shift for me was, first of all, in college and having to learn to talk like that. But that was just on the court. And that was a kind of a means to an end. Like, I'm going to always use that. But then what really used in just in general in life and using my voice and having thoughts to say, and it was a kind of a perfect storm of things. I went through a really bad breakup, like where I completely lost myself and, tried to fit my world into somebody else's world. And, it never works. And so that at the same exact time, I was playing basketball overseas and I had torn my ACL for the second time. So I was out about 18 months. And then the third one was going to have to go back to work in a business that I was failing in. And so I always joke, I had a broken heart, I had a broken bank account, and I broke physically. My ACL was broken. And it was like this perfect storm that I was the lowest point of my life. And so I literally had to build myself up from the ground again in every single way, spiritually, mentally, physically. And I remember one day speaking differently. And so I think I just listened to all of these self-help. And I just remember being so broken mentally was really the worst part, that my self-worth and self-loathing almost, and not feeling worthy. So I just had to build myself up. I remember listening to YouTube or everything about how to fix my brain. I know it sounds crazy, but it wasn't thinking properly. You're not meant to be thinking that you're not worthy, you're not supposed to be here and all this stuff. And so I had to figure out how to think again. And I think that is really what changed my life moving forward with that. And then business took off from there as well. I mean, that was a long process though. That took 6, 8 grueling, awful months of just struggling. And on top of that, having surgery, learning how to rewalk again. And all of that was playing a part. Every single day, I would just bombard my mind with everything that is positive. And just, you have to, in order to tear down old thinking and then reprogram. And so every single time that something came into my head or thought something differently, I had to immediately check it at the door, the gateway, so it didn't get into my unconscious brain and kind of go from there. I know it's a little bit high level, but that was what had to do it for me. And so that was really the beginning of it. And then I remember I was in New York and somebody asked me to share my story, and it was a 55-minute talk, 55-minute. And at that point, I couldn't even string a minute together. And I'm coherent. I'm what do you want me to talk about for 55 minutes? And so I remember going through that, and it was the absolute best feeling in the world, Clara. I hadn't really done a lot of speeches up to that point. And it was so beautiful because it was my voice and I heard it and people responding to it and my story and laughing and having that back and forth. That was so gratifying. And then after that, I started seeking out public speaking, using my voice opportunities. And it was a lot of thinking differently. Thoughts were different, so my words were different. And then it was putting myself in uncomfortable situations. And then lastly, it was then the communication to my team and things like that in my agency. You have to do it even when you don't feel like it. And so I was such an avoider. No, I'm not feeling good today. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want my negativity to go on them, or something like that. And that's kind of how I would think. If I wasn't doing well, they don't want to hear from me. I don't want to inconvenience them. But at the end of the day, it's like people need that positivity in their lives and they're looking for it. I always like to say they're out in the desert. Boss is yelling at me. Their kids are yelling or something's happening in the home or car breaks down. And so they come back to me to where it's a safe space, and they need to have that encouragement, and that refer to it as like the oasis, and they need to be encouraged and re-pumped up and back into the world again. So it's like, and I still fight it too sometimes that daily struggle of just wanting to be with myself and govern myself, because that's how I built myself initially playing basketball when I was younger, and then also rebuilding myself. It was all me. And so it's always making sure I have to get outside of my comfort zone and talk to other people, especially people in my organization who are trusting in me to help them and lead them. Yeah.
It seems like you're really playing now the role of the coach and creating the positivity and inspiration for others.
Yeah. Working on it every day.
So just to go quickly back, Notre Dame, how did you pick your school and why Notre Dame?
I went to a private Catholic school growing up, middle school and elementary, and then went on a private Catholic school. So and I was fortunate for that. It was great. It was the best decision I ever did. But I remember them saying like, oh, she chose Notre Dame. A little Catholic girl just went to go play for Notre Dame, private university. And like, that's why I chose it. And I remember just being like irritated by that. And I was like, why did I choose Notre Dame? I know exactly why I chose them. They were on the verge of becoming elite. What I looked for and all I wanted in college, I wanted to help a program on the verge of becoming elite to become elite. And then 2, win a national championship game. And that is all I wanted. And that is what drove me and was my obsession for all my getting up in the morning and going to work out. That's what I wanted. Yes. And so that really drove me when I was looking at different schools. And one of the best things I did was I didn't do the club circuit initially. I just worked every summer as hard as I could. And then I would play high school. And then the next year I joked because I went on this travel team because I got invited to go my junior, senior year. And my head coach was like, oh gosh, still work hard. It's been working really well for you. It was one of those tournaments that Notre Dame saw me at. And so I'm so grateful for it. And I got to go to an unofficial visit up there, and I had 5 official visits signed up kind of that following fall. But I went to Notre Dame and it felt right. I had great conversations with Coach McGraw. All the teammates were good. When I played with them, it felt right. And it was honestly an easy decision. And I had seen such esteemed success. And then I'll be the first to try and say that I went to school first, but I did. I was like, I'm going to play basketball. And I just was grateful that Notre Dame is such a high education program and also a great network, an alumni network and things like that. So it was just a degree from there really meant something. But I really went there for the basketball and for those 2 things. And that was really what drove me wanting to do that. Best decision I ever did, though, because I really wanted to transfer my sophomore year. I was on the verge of doing it, but my pride wouldn't let me. That stubbornness really does fuel us as much as it sometimes does get in our way. But at the end of the day, if we can get it set to the side, and I'm just so grateful that was the time I did. I dug my heels in, made a decision to stay, and then the best thing I ever did. And so I always like to say that is kind of the power of focus. What ended up happening at Notre Dame was we went to back-to-back national championship games. Obviously didn't win a national championship. Runner-up twice was unbearable. However, a lot of amazing things happened. But what was crazy was Notre Dame went on to become 6 of the next 10 Final Fours and then become the program. They're 4th in the nation right now again. And that is the best legacy we could have ever left, is changing the culture to what it is now. And so I don't really dwell about not winning a national championship game. It was the fact that we were able to really change the culture and to become to what the program is today. And it's just awesome to say that we helped build that. And that is just say you built something like that and helped build it is just really cool.
Yes, that's fantastic. And it seems like that hit definitely at least one of your goals that you were looking to achieve. Right. The second one you came very close to. Sometimes not achieving completely our goals is good because it helps us strive further in the next stages of our life, I believe. The decision to stay, do you remember what was the key decision moment? Why did you decide to stay?
I think it was pride, because I had stuck to something, or I had been there and I hadn't been successful yet. Like all the wrong motivators, but it was, I didn't want people to be like, oh, she didn't make it at Notre Dame. Like, oh, she had to transfer. And that is what was like, I will prove these people wrong. I will prove myself right, that I know I can play here. Have I given it all? Do I have another level? And it was kind of one of those where I was like, I'm going to make this decision quickly and not dwell about it or go back and forth. And it was like, once I made that decision, the next hour I was in the gym and I was going.
Yeah.
So I think that's really what did it for me, was the fact that I didn't want to give people that satisfaction that she didn't make it. And then obviously it turned back into some more inward motivation of like, okay, I know I belong here and I'm going to prove it and I'm not going to be denied. And that was the mentality. It was an easy kind of shift for me. And once I made that decision, it took off.
What were some of the top moments you would think of your basketball college career? Is there a specific game or tournament? I don't know if it's the nationals that you really remember.
I remember a couple moments, actually. I was the leading scorer for Notre Dame at that point, and we were just doing really well. And it came to the end of the year kind of season award for the conference. And we were the Big East. It's a very competitive conference. Obviously not anymore. There's no Big East anymore. But the point is, I remember Coach McGraw one day, we were passing in the hallway and she was like, oh, I can't wait to see your name on the awards, like the first team in the awards. And then I was like, you think like me in the awards? Call conference? And we were like second in the conference that year. And I was the leading scorer. And it never dawned on me. She made that point. She was like, Natalie, you're the leading scorer. We're second in the conference. The awards came out and I was on the first team. But it was like my identity hadn't caught up with my talent. So it's like I had to continue to elevate that. And I remember that was a really distinctive time because it was like kind of a shift in my mindset of like, oh, wow, I do belong here and I am competing with the best and am one of the best, right? And so that was a really, really significant time in my mental development and identity shift. So that was significant. But then also like the most memorable games was junior year when we played Tennessee in this Elite Eight. So the Elite Eight, right, goes to the Final Four. And so Tennessee is a huge program. Pat Summitt's obviously a huge name in women's basketball. One of her last games. And it was against Tennessee. And we prepared relentlessly for that game. And I remember the warm-up song that they played for us, the pump-up song. It was Rihanna. And we were all, in the middle of the game. They would call a play and all of us in unison would be like, oh, back door, Nat, watch back door. Or like, oh, pick and roll, sink in. They didn't know what to do with us. And it was the craziest thing because it was like that huge mountain that we'd gotten over. We got into the Final Four and it was just an unbelievable feeling. Like we really did it. Kind of top moments would be beating UConn, the Final Four back-to-back games, which we'd lost to them by margins of 30, maybe the year before, consistently, not combined. And then to go and beat them back-to-back years, it was kind of those defining moments. And then for me personally, it was, we were part of the largest, it was called the Junkanoo Jam tournament in Thanksgiving. And we were down by 18 to Duke. It was awful. They were ranked nationally as well. And we came back in the second half. And I remember like hitting a last second shot with like 3 seconds to go. And the place went crazy. We went crazy. It was amazing to be a part of the largest comeback in program history, especially against like a Duke like that. And, you dream of hitting game winners. And I'd missed them before as well. But it was cool to be in that position to be a part of it. And then I would say the last cool, crazy shot of my career that I remember was my senior year. And it was the Final Four against UConn. We were up kind of the whole game and then series of bad turnovers. I remember being part of one of them or something. And we were down by 2 with seconds to go. And I remember one of my teammates, Skylar, came barreling down. We had 5 seconds to go or something like that. And she came down, tried to draw a foul and shot it and missed. But I remember like sprinting as hard as I could, thought I could get a wide open layup. But because I sprinted, I got the rebound and like did some sort of like reverse finish. And then we ended up being tied. And as the buzzer sounded out, and then we ended up going to win on in overtime. Like, those are the memories that is just so worth it. All that blood, sweat, and tears, practice, what you live for. And so I remember those more happy memories than the losing of the national championship games. It was overcoming those big games, teams that we would UConn lose to game after game after game, season after season. And, and to finally make it to those Final Fours. And it was just so cool to be a part of. And it's just like our team knew it at the very beginning of the year. It's hard to explain, but like that's what was so special about that team is we knew it. We knew we were a championship caliber team, Final Four team, and that was really special. So that was kind of some of my top moments I remember at Notre Dame.
Thanks for sharing. That sounds amazing. Just trying to imagine being there and watching you. So you had really successful college career, were able to elevate the level of the team, and then you were chosen to play for the Washington Mystics in the WNBA. How's that feeling and that experience of transitioning from college player to WNBA?
Yeah, I love talking about this mostly as a lessons learned examples. You know how I talked about how it took a Coach McGraw to tell me, hey, you belong to be in the first team, you know? I had always dreamed of that. And I had never dreamed to play basketball as a career. And I'd never even been to a basketball game in the WNBA. I mean, I'd seen highlights here, never really watched a game, was not around one growing up. And so my first ever game in the WNBA that I watched was the game I played in. So that was like a crazy coincidence. I remember stepping in, and I think it was the fact that I didn't feel like I belonged there. Like I was ready to make my mark, and it's like I felt that I belonged, but then I think I got complacent. And when I started failing a little bit, struggling, I was like, okay, well, I didn't have that drive within me that I wanted to win a national championship game and I wanted to help a program become elite. And because I didn't have that huge focus, I really struggled. But another thing too, it was really difficult to go from a championship program at Notre Dame to be having built a huge fan base. Like it was so cool to see how the fans slowly but surely sold out crowds at the end of it. Where I went to go to Washington, D.C., and we were the last place team in the league. The team before had won 6 games in a row. That year I was there, we won 5 games. And it was demoralizing. No one was in the stands. And to go from that championship program, high standards, to where just a bunch of different players stuck together, and they say money changes things, but at the end of the day, a team's a team and you can kind of come together. But there really wasn't that I found. And it was as difficult as a rookie to accept that. And I saw a lot of struggle and a lot of politics and a lot of different things that I just was like, oh, I really am not having a great time, that great experience. And so I kind of resisted it, and it was really difficult. And I remember going overseas, grateful to kind of be out of that experience and not really wanting to go back to playing the WNBA again. It was awesome to be drafted and to say I got drafted. I think the biggest lessons for me would have been to continue to grow. And it's not that I even got complacent. I just needed a new goal. I had worked my whole life for those college goals, and then I didn't know what I was working towards anymore.
Yeah.
So that was, I guess, a biggest regret was maybe not working towards something outside of obviously a championship. We got to personally work at something. And then secondly was you have to go in there with unwavering confidence. And I didn't have it. It took me my junior year, but my coach to even tell me that I was going to be on the first team. And so I didn't have that. It's like my talent was there, but the belief wasn't there. If you have the belief, the talent will follow. But I think really had to work on my game mentally the most, and I didn't.
So it almost seems like you a little bit backtracked going to the WNBA. It seems like you had the support system in college. You had the coach who believed in you. You had a huge amount of fans that came to the game just to watch you and cheer you on. And in WNBA, you get drafted, but then you went back with questioning, do I actually belong here? Am I good enough to play? So even though you elevate the level, it doesn't mean that the mindset stays with you. It seems like you backtrack with questioning yourself again, whether you should be playing on that level and what the goals are.
Yeah, you really nailed it. It's like you elevated, but then it's like I forgot the process of what got me to elevate in the first place on the first level. When I got to the league, I just didn't repeat that process.
Yeah.
If I were to have a regret, that would be a regret. I like to say, like, yeah, I was a good player, but a great player, those are the ones that don't become complacent and continue to work hard and find these things that will continue to motivate you and inspire you to get up and keep those habits and disciplines that you established early to get to be a good player.
Yes. And there's also the confidence level. I can share a story that I've gone through a similar journey in some ways, that I started playing tennis very late because nobody in my family was an athlete. And so I picked up the game really late, kind of behind of actually everybody else in that age group. And then there's a certain period of time where I really focused and I caught up. But my mind never believed that I'm as good as the players who are at the top. So even though I worked really hard, my game actually got there. It was the mind that was holding me back. And I was competing and playing and had some wins even against the top players in the country who then went on and play tennis professionally. They're now retired. But how do you continue to realize that at some point, yes, I'm good enough and I deserve to be here? And every time you change that environment, I wonder if there's just a little bit more hesitation than there should be to pull you back to that a bit of a negative, or no negative, but self-doubt, I guess, which is so detrimental to athletic performance.
So detrimental. And I think it's almost painful and agonizing to go through that lack of belief. And I went through a period, the second kind of hardest mental thing I had to deal with outside of obviously the one when I was professional that I spoke on earlier was my sophomore year. And I think I talked about it. It's just like that paradigm. I would be in practice and I would make a mistake. And it was instead of like, oh, all right, now I'm about to like beat your ass, because which is like eventually what you get to. But when I would make a mistake, I expected to make that mistake. And then of course, you're just going to make another mistake and you make another mistake. And I just remember holding tears back. We weren't allowed to cuss in practice. And here I am, obviously that didn't quite, carry on. I remember just like finally letting out like a curse word. And then I'd, coach on the line and off you go running. And I just remember running and just like finally like tears just rushing down my face. Like just like trying to hold it all together. And it was just, I remember dreading practice. And I never dreaded practice. I loved it. It's like the only thing that I loved that day, after school and all that stuff. And so confidence must be worked on daily. And it's so easy to get torn down. I always like to say, like, somebody misses 9 shots and they make 1. Confident people will focus on the 1 they made. But people who maybe struggle with confidence or something like that, they'll focus on the 9 shots they missed. Or if they made 9 shots, they'll focus on the 1 shot they missed. And I think that is just why it is a daily habit for people, maybe a daily struggle, to get over and continue to stay confident. So I think that's where habits come really into play, of not letting yourself go down these bad thought patterns into the abyss of awful thoughts. And for me, it's working out. Like if I'm working out and I'm getting in the cold tub or I'm doing the sauna, that for me keeps me in a high state of environment. I feel strong. I feel powerful, confident, wanting to talk to people. But if I'm like chilling and not getting up or snooze button 18 times, that is just not a good recipe for Nat, And so I really have to find things to maintain that level of confidence and self-belief, because especially as an entrepreneur, your day looks like this sometimes. You have rejection and people don't call you back, And so you have to maintain some level of emotional stability, which I'm grateful for. I do have that. But on top of that was the mental toughness as well. Mm-hmm. And so 2 things I'll touch on really quickly was Coach McGraw said, like, you're the most mentally tough player I've ever coached. And obviously she's coached fantastic players. And so that was so amazing. But then I remember going into business and being so mentally weak that I was like, who am I? Like, what is this? And so I really had to reteach myself because why? Because I was doing something different, a complete different thing. And I had to just remind myself to have to go through this whole journey again. Mm-hmm. But last thing I'll say on the confidence thing is I admire people who are confident. But I remember my sister is one of the most confident people I've ever met. She just exudes it. She would just be wearing whatever, like gotten out of hot yoga and just can go talk to people looking like a crazy person. And I'm just like, here I am, like carrying myself well, like dressed, afraid to go talk to people. And she would just go talk to people. And I was like, how do you do that? It was just like remarkable. I know how obviously important confidence is, and it can really be very helpful. Belief in self is obviously priority number 1. And what I would say to people is developing that.
And I love the example you've given of all the lessons and the awareness of that you've gained through your basketball career, to where you're so focused on how you structure your day now. And I think a lot of that, even for me, it helps knowing the performance mindset, because I think being an athlete in whatever sport you are, a lot of it is recognizing when your mind performs the best or your body performs the best. And that is the replicable thing. So obviously, you know the thought process and how you function at your best from thinking perspective. And it seems like you're very structured in how you create that performance mindset in your business now, in a way you organize your life and create your calendars, etc., and create your habits.
Mm-hmm. And I had to develop that because I really never had a job. I don't equate me playing basketball as a job because it was loved every second of it, playing overseas and playing as a career. So I never really had that. I have to be at work at X amount of time. And I really struggled from going as an entrepreneur from a athlete who did obviously have to be at places at some time. And I would just naturally get up, and those habits were built because I did it for so long. But when I no longer was playing basketball, I really struggled leading myself and not having a coach to tell me what to do, and not having a coach for me what to do in the gym, or like how to eat, and obviously what time to be there for the game. It was just like, I didn't have that. And so for me, it was like, I had to learn how to lead myself in a different realm. And so it would be easy for me to go to the gym hours of a day, and then my business would never go anywhere, So like I had to really figure out those are my priorities now, and having to do things and fit it all in, and waking up. And it was just everything that I wasn't used to, but it was obviously to apply it to a different realm. So that's kind of what I would say is just, in order for you to lead others, you have to learn to lead yourself. So then you can lead others, and then you can lead leaders. And that's a really big difference. And so that was probably my biggest thing. And a lot of people probably still struggle with it, is leading themselves in growth.
Yeah.
And not just staying stagnant.
Yeah. I do want to go back a little bit to your overseas career. You played in Australia. How was that experience? Curious how you enjoyed that. And how many years did you play in Australia?
So I played 7 seasons over the span of like 5 or 6 years. And I loved every minute of it. I remember playing my first year overseas was in Romania. And I, without going into detail, did not have a great time. And I told my agent, anywhere but Europe. After that, I just encompassed all of Europe into that 4, 5, 6 months experience. And so he said, how about Australia? And I was like, done. And so I went to Australia, and the first day, my coach, he didn't pick me up, but I met him at a pub, and it was like 11:30, 12 in the afternoon. And we're sitting there, and he's like drinking, having a drink, and he's having a beer. And it was just such a different, stark contrast of how this relationship and how the people were, their way of life over there was. And I just really enjoyed more of the laid back. They practiced once a day, kind of got your day as well, rather than twice a day like they did in Europe. It's like my body was being better, not breaking down as much. It was a shorter season. The beach was right there, warm weather. It was like just everything I needed. And so I absolutely loved every minute of Australia, genuinely. And I met so many cool people, like family that became family to me. And I haven't got a chance to go back after my playing career ended. But when I do, I'm excited to go visit all of those people that encompass the whole continent, the whole country, everywhere. And so I'm just so grateful because I played at 3 different clubs throughout that time and just made a lot of different relationships. And it was really beautiful. And I encourage everyone to go over there when they can. And also, if they do go to Australia, go to New Zealand as well, because it's so beautiful and breathtaking. So you can go live over there in Australia, go for it. But if you can't, go over there and visit, go to New Zealand and visit. It's quite remarkable. And the people are genuinely really great.
Yeah. New Zealand is on my list for sure. Well, and with that, Australia, if you're already that far.
If you're already that far, definitely go.
Yeah.
For sure. Yes.
Awesome. Anything that really stood out to you from your overseas career? Things you want to highlight?
It was interesting because when I went overseas, my goal was always more stateside of like, I want to get back in the WNBA, I want to play there. That was kind of the pinnacle. But then when I stayed a little bit more in Australia, where I didn't really have great experiences in the WNBA, it got to the point where I remember having the thought of, what am I really doing am I just chasing championships? Am I just trying to play as long as I can? At the end of the day, like, what's one more championship if you've gotten two already? It started to not make sense for me anymore. I wanted to kind of start building my career. And because I was in business still at that time, I'd work so hard for 3-4 months. And then I would get excited and things would start happening. And then I would leave again for another 8 months. It got to kind of that point of like, what am I really doing? And I would have teammates who would still compete to play for their national team in Australia. And obviously being American, you can't compete for them. So they would be working really hard and having a goal of things like that. I think I stopped having a goal of what am I really doing here? And I remember it got to that point where I wanted that kind of victory lap of like, all right, you know what? I might be ready to be done. I think I could be done and be okay with it, if that makes sense. Because I always had the dream of like, I'm going to play till I'm 40 or I can't walk again because I loved it. It was great. But then I never imagined, obviously, that I wouldn't be able to walk physically. When I tore my second ACL, I was like, okay, I'm going to do one more victory lap. And I ended up fortunate enough to be able to sign a 2-year contract, going to go overseas. And then a month before I was supposed to leave, I retore my ACL. So that was the third time combined of ACLs. And it was a weird moment for me that I was like, okay, I'm done. And I made the decision to retire then. And let me tell you, that was difficult. And I didn't realize it at the time. Because when you're building your body back up again, you're just focused on this little muscle growing this big. You're building yourself up. So once I was done with rehab, I remember really being like, whoa, like, what am I doing? I was like 29, 30 years old. And I'm paying rent for the first time in my life, bills and all these things, and still trying to be an entrepreneur, not having that steady income. And that was all in my face, like all happening all at once. But I think I struggled because I didn't get the closure that I wanted. And I know we've talked about this before. When you don't have that closure, you're just not quite together as a whole, different focuses and stuff. You spent all your blood, sweat, and tears, love for the game, and pour everything into it. And then to not be able to end it how you want to, I think that's really a struggle. And I think I consciously made the decision to retire, but mentally my identity and everything kind of wrapped up into that was really a kind of struggle. And really just why I think I struggled in business so much initially was because I was mourning this career of everything that I loved. And I didn't have that anymore. And I was like, where are my people? Where are my like family, my teammates, my worth? All that was tied up in that. And that was a struggle, I would say, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it is really our identity, the sport and who we become. And even going through my own experience, after I finished college tennis, I actually knew that was my end. My body was not able to do more. The only thing I thought I'm going to be able to do for the rest of my life was yoga, which was probably very good, like rehabilitating. I did yoga for like 2 years, 360 days a year. And I think that actually helped me recover, I think, a lot of my pains after that. It was one of the darkest moments. You know, I think every athlete have problems with injuries because it's that mind-body connection. And as an athlete, you so focus on pushing both forward and pushing the limits and seeing how far you can take them. And it's the mind and the body and both together. They both need to be optimized in order to improve and grow. And so I think it's so hard, even when I'm speaking to my guests who've had that journey, when your body is failing on you and you're like, I want to play more, but it's the body that's not allowing you to actually perform. It's so heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And it's so easy to talk to people who have been in that situation, to be a championed athlete and your body fails you. And you see people go on to have great careers who maybe weren't as good as you or you competed with, and they're still playing now at my age, 33, 34, 35. And it's like, man, like it used to be a jealousy thing of like, God, I'm so jealous of you. And now it's more so like, I am impressed and I'm happy for you. And I'm grateful to kind of get to that point. But it's just heartbreaking because you work so hard to really deserve to be able to walk out in your own terms. And so when you don't have that, it's really difficult to kind of find that closure and acceptance. And not everybody handles it great. And everyone does handle it differently, but there always is that common connection with people you do follow. that with, for sure.
I think we all struggle with it in just our own ways, and we have different ways of expressing it.
Right.
I would love to just transition to what you do now and a little bit of how you find your entrepreneurship journey with financial advising to people, because I think it's so timely even now. You've shared about the difficult transition. Anything you want to openly say, and especially now, I think being aware about your own personal finances is so important, and it's so empowering as a human having finances under control. And so let me just stop there and give the mic back to you.
My journey started, actually, my twin brother was the one who reached out to me, and he was like, sit down with these people. I trust them. You definitely need them. I know you don't know anything about finance. I know you haven't spoken to anyone. Fine, you're right. So I sat down and I ended up thanking my brother at the end of the meeting because honestly, I became a client. I was super impressed right away. I had known none of this stuff, honestly. And at the end of the day, I ended up coming on board at the same time because it was mostly like, if I didn't know any of this stuff, none of my people knew any of this stuff. And so I just naturally was able to start building something for myself as I was still playing and kind of supplement my playing salary overseas in Australia. I know it's hard to believe, but we didn't make as much as the men, right? It's hard to believe.
Yes.
But I was grateful to kind of be building something at the same time. And I think what did is because I was educated first. Once I was educated and understood it and how it was changing my world, I wanted to go change other people's lives and help them. And so my brother, he could have just helped me with a vehicle that was helpful and got me better on track financially. But what really changed my life was the business. And I'm so grateful for it because, you know, we're really revolutionizing not only the face of financial services, but the financial industry. It's like so much is focused on money management and actively managed funds, like in the stock market and stuff. And so we're really focused on like that asset protection side of things, of helping people still get high rates of return outside of the stock market and growing their money, but also growing it tax advantaged. And so like at a time when the market is what it is right now, we are just exploding because we're able to help people with products outside of the stock market. And then on the other side of it is, it's no longer like a want to make more money. People need to make more money right now. The last 50 years, everything's gotten more expensive, but what hasn't increased is people's salaries. And so it's just such a time where people are struggling paycheck to paycheck. And the fact that I can not only help them get in a better position financially, but also give them an opportunity to make more money. And so like that was an easy, I don't even have to feel like I'm a salesperson because I just share what we do, who we are, what we're doing, how we're expanding. And then people get to choose what they want, what they would like to learn a little bit more about. And I think that's why I love the company so much, is because I was able to build something for myself. I was able to kind of have that time freedom and flexibility to be able to still live the life I want, but then also fit my business into my lifestyle. And once I was overseas and having that lifestyle of the flexibility, I was pretty much unemployable at that point because I didn't like the idea of have that 9 to 5 and things like that. And so that's one of the biggest things I really like about the business, is the kind of that freedom and to be able to build something for myself, which is similar. And for me, just to be transparent of what I'm actually trying to build, is We Got Next Leadership Development. I love talking about this because it's building something that is unique. And so a lot of athletes always end up going into coaching or training because that's like all they know, and they want to be around that world. And it may not be just what they want, right? And so I'm helping a lot of athletes. You know, we speak their language. Obviously, us on the call, we met in instant connection. And so We Got Next just comes from like basketball lingo of you go to the courts, you get your pickup, you get your 5 people. You can't play until you have your 5, and then you step on the court and waiting till the next team's done. We got next, right? And so I love that aspect of what I've been able to do. Is when my business took off was really when I started taking everything that I learned from basketball and really the camaraderie, the humor, the dancing, the fun of it all with basketball and the teamwork and discipline, all that to move toward a common goal. That's when my business really took off with We Got Next. And so it's a bunch of misfits who look like they don't belong or shouldn't be in the financial industry. But whatever it is, you ask us questions. We're so fundamental and we'll know our stuff the back of our hand and able to help people. And I think that's what's so cool, is just like with basketball, it doesn't matter what you look like. You can play, people will respect you. And that's exactly how it is I always joke, like, if somebody is dying and then someone comes to save you and they don't look like your idea of a doctor, are you going to turn away their help? Of course not, right? And so that's how I think about, like, with us. We may not look like that traditional stiff financial industry, but we've got a bunch of people who know their stuff and are on it and are looking to build and keep around that competitive world and really changing that culture, like I talked about before with basketball. And so it's kind of the same concept here, is we're changing the culture of financial services, changing it, because I know there are tons of people that need to be helped. And I know that we're stepping in to meet those people that not necessarily the traditional industry can even see or are left behind, honestly, every day.
You're consulting and obviously helping a lot of people. What do you see are some of the key mistakes or maybe misunderstandings that people have that you want to give them even just free advice? What should they look at or what should they consider to be more financially stable or perhaps grow their financial health? And maybe especially now as we're going through this crazy turbulence times when nobody really knows what's going to happen in the next 1 to 2 years.
Absolutely. It's scary when you're in a position where you don't know, right? Obviously don't know what's going to happen, but at the same time of, like, when you don't have your finances in order and you don't feel like you're in a good position financially, it's even scarier.
Right.
And so, like, that's our mission of trying to give people some peace of mind at night. And so I would say some of the biggest mistakes I've seen is waiting too long to save. Sometimes a lot of people just try and pay off all their debt, and it takes a lot longer than they probably expect. And then they get to the round where they're 40, 50, 60, and they haven't saved anything. And so even a little bit early can go a really long way. And then 2 is making sure it's the right vehicles. And that comes from a combination of educating yourself, but also knowing who to speak to and kind of trust with your finances, things like that. And so just making sure you're educating yourself and doing that part. And I remember being in the WNBA and they gave a 23% match. That was like what they remember talking about. And I didn't do it. Why? Because I didn't understand it. So I love that our company, we were able to educate first. And because that's why I came on board, is because I understood it. Once I understood it, I was empowered. And so that's kind of another thing I would say, is just definitely self-educating. And then 3, there are so many opportunities now where you don't just have to rely on a job to make money. And I think that's super important, because you can't rely on just your job and living paycheck to paycheck or going to school to try and get a better degree so you can maybe get a little bit increase in raise, which is not guaranteed.
Yes.
And so vaccinating yourself against the unpredictability coming up is there's so many opportunities out there to be able to make a little bit more money. It's like trying to sacrifice some of that Netflix time or going to play golf and stuff like that, with your buddies. It's like, what if you could just spend a little bit of time here and there to be able to maybe build something for yourself that could kind of vaccinate you from the uncertainty coming up? Those are probably my biggest things I've seen, would be to start saving younger now. 2 is making sure you understand and ask questions and educate and just showing up and learning. And then 3 is just trying to find something like a side hustle to be able to make some more money.
I love those. Just on the education, because I've been on this journey, I think I shared with you previously. Educating can be really hard because there's so many things now and everybody's pushing sort of their own agenda. I tried doing that a while back. I was like, I'm going to keep my own stocks. And 2 weeks later, time goes by. It's like, oh, this is more time consuming than I thought. Are there any specific things from education perspective you'd recommend, where to start or what worked for you?
I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I trusted my brother, and he knew someone and who ended up educating me. And I just basically showed up. And the more I showed up, the more I learned. To give kind of people some hope, is I went from a very disinterested, not even interested in finance, to someone who now has made it a career and love it. And I think it was just because a lot of people, especially women, have resisted it for a long time, thinking it was a man's world. And so I'm grateful that our company, we're the largest #1 broker dealer for women for the 6th year in a row. And so there's so many women that are not only winning, but helping other women. And I think that's just so important to see. And so just making sure you're working with people who you do trust, or educating yourself knowledgeably when it comes to blogs or books to read. That was honestly what I would say. So making sure you're talking to somebody that you trust. maybe talk around about it your friends, and then just don't go with what everyone else does. Like that was probably the biggest thing that I learned, is just going down the credit card game or trying to spend to keep up with the Joneses. All of that stuff is what everyone else does, and why we're in this financial crisis right now of a very illiterate country that spends a lot more than they save. That's kind of some of the things that I would say as well. Just continuing to try and educate yourself, whether it be YouTube or, anything, or even just starting your own personal budget and saving money aside until you find someone who you do feel comfortable working with. That's kind of what I would say. But really, when it comes down to it, the foundation we like to have is maybe not all of your money in the stock market, right? Maybe try and diversify a little bit. So you've got money, maybe that's protected assets, that's growing safely outside of the market and tax advantage. That's obviously important. And then have some money left over if you wanted to kind of play with it a little bit. That's totally fine. But also working on getting out of debt, but also saving, so that's kind of like that foundation of building finances and really feeling like you're on top of it and empowering yourself. And it's not a one quick fix all and then you're good for the rest of your life. It's just a little bit extra of showing up to your finances and monitoring them and in commitment to that. Then that's really going to be so, so helpful.
I love that. You said showing up and putting in some effort and work. Yes, you'll be better off if you do it continuously than just postponing it forever.
We hear a lot of people, I don't want to look at my statement right now. I can't imagine what it did. The market did so bad last year. And it's like, just look at, let's see what we can do something different maybe next time.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, just the anxiety of seeing the numbers. Is there a specific message you want to get out to the world? What would you want to encourage people to be doing more of or less of? Recovering from the pandemic, a lot of instability going on with still the war in Ukraine. Yeah, there's lots going on.
Oh, goodness, Clara, so much. And such a good question. If there's one thing I've noticed with how polarizing our nation and maybe even world can be right now, at the end of the day, if you can just have more conversations with people, and coming from me who never used to just talk to people, it was just amazing, but you can learn something from everybody. And so maybe the lesson is talk less, listen more. And that's what I've found. I've learned and met so many cool people just by listening and maybe asking questions and being genuinely honest. And we might have separate views on life or anything personal, but there are so many cool things about this world, like that connection piece in a world where we're all just looking down at our phones, and
yes.
Instead of having that community. And so I think developing people's social skills and communication skills will really not only help you in whatever you're doing, but I think you'll feel a little bit more fulfilled of a life and kind of being able to help transform the world. Because I think we're just getting more and more separated and polarized, instead of what can really kind of bring us together is having that understanding and having conversations that aren't meant to just be combative, but just, hey, let's have a common ground. Let's have a connection rather than separating. And I think that's probably the one thing I find the most, is because you'll be so surprised how many cool people you meet just by asking questions and being curious about others rather than just so inward, which obviously all of us all inherently are a little selfish, but getting outside of that, out of yourself, and I think you'll live a lot more fulfilled life.
Thank you. I love that. And that's really one of the things about my podcast. I love interviewing people like you and just asking questions and listen. I get always so much wisdom from it. So hopefully my listeners find it valuable as well. And even something personally, I find that I struggle with almost more after a pandemic. We talked earlier about being introvert. And so I definitely feel like the pandemic shifted me more to introversion.
Sure.
Even my friends who categorize themselves as extrovert, I was like, oh, I'm now way more tired after hanging out with people. And so I actually think that 2 years living in our house and more of a comfort zone and being locked in, going back to having those conversations can be a bit scary. And it's probably the right thing we need to start doing more. So Thank you for that, Nat. And lastly, where can people reach you to have that conversation, whether it's just inspiration, creativity, or finance advice? What's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Clara. So the best way to reach out would be either a phone call, an email, or even my Instagram. The first being my phone number, so 859-519-8063. My email would just be natalie.novosel.wfg@gmail.com. And then my Instagram handle is if Nat me then who. So the phrase, obviously, if not me then who. It's if Nat me then who.
I love it. Awesome.
Feel free, reach out. I'd love to connect with people, obviously, at any time, or even if you just have any inquiries or any questions or want to further a conversation or make a connection. I would love that. That would be awesome.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure to add those to the episode notes so people can easily click and find you.
I appreciate that. Well, thanks, Clara. Well, this has been an amazing conversation today. I feel like I've talked to so much. You can keep going, and we got a whole interview with you.
If you enjoyed this episode, I want to ask you to please do two things that would help me greatly. One, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform that you use to listen to this episode. Two, please share this podcast with a friend who you believe might enjoy it as well. It is a great way to remind someone you care about them by sharing a conversation they might be interested in. Thank you for listening.